The very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier podcast, where I will sit down and converse with the superstars, the overachievers, the masters of our craft. Each episode will be a deep dive into their personal philosophies, their habits, the tools they use, and the secrets to not only their success, but overcoming failure as well.
First, find somebody you can mimic, then find somebody you can stand, and then try to focus on one style until you master that style.
So if you say I can't do something, well, you're absolutely right. But if you say you're going to, you're absolutely right with that too.
People say that you shouldn't define yourself by your work. That is not true.
You know what Dave Farley does when he's, lucky enough to be at the World Equestrian Games? I'm watching other people work.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that enough.
This podcast is for all of you out there who share my passion for the job and the desire to always improve. These interviews will put you in touch with the inner workings of the role models we all want to emulate. So let's get to it.
There's only so many hours in a day, and it's a matter of what you do with them.
Welcome, everyone. Today's guest probably needs no introduction. I'm sure all of you have at least one of his textbooks in your collection. You've probably heard his podcast, and I'm sure you've seen a video or two posted by him on his YouTube channel. I first met Dr. Simon Curtis at this year's International Healthcare Summit in Cincinnati, Ohio. I spotted him on the trade show floor, approached, and upon introducing myself, he said, my fellow podcaster. So we had a great conversation about all things podcast, and by the end of it, he'd agreed to do an interview with me. Before we get to that conversation, I'll read you his bio. Now, just a warning here. This list of accomplishments is going to make you feel like you haven't spent your time wisely. This man is a powerhouse, and he has done and accomplished a lot. Dr. Simon Curtis has been a practicing farrier in Newmarket for 44 years. He has lectured and demonstrated farriery in more than 30 countries on 6 continents, including the USA, Australia, India, Russia, and Brazil. He's an author of 4 textbooks on farriery. He has been published in numerous journals. Simon is the only farrier to have been awarded the honorary associateship of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. He's a past master of the Worshipful Company of Farriers, 2001-2, and has chaired the Farriers Registration Council, 2006-9. He is a fellow of the Worshipful Company of Farriers by examination, an FWCF, and is currently an examiner. Simon is a 4th-generation farrier. His family have been farriers and blacksmiths on the Cambridgeshire and Suffolk border for at least 150 years. In 2005, Simon was inducted into the International Farriers Hall of Fame at the Kentucky Derby Museum. He gained a first-degree Bachelor of Science with honors in farriery through Myerscough College, University of Central Lancashire in 2011, and completed a PhD degree in equine physiology and biomechanics in 2017. In 2018, Simon Curtis was presented with the Sir Colin Spedding Award for his contribution to equine knowledge and published The Hoof of the Horse. Not too shabby, right? I did warn you. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I hope you do too. So I'm sitting here today with Dr. Simon Curtis, who I met for the very first time in the trade show hall at the summit in Cincinnati. And it's been great to finally meet this hero of mine and a fellow podcaster. So if you haven't heard, his podcasts are great and should give them a listen. We'll hear a little bit of Simon's story today and what he's been doing and what he's going to be doing. To start, I'm sure some people have probably heard you've done a few interviews where you kind of give your potted bio of where you've been and what you've done. So you started out at the racetrack, right?
Well, we don't do it on the racetrack like you do in most countries. We have yards, so the stabling's off track.
Oh, okay.
Horses are always trained off track in the UK. But in Newmarket, it's quite similar because there's sort of, 70 or 90 yards in the town.
Okay.
And the heath either side, and they walk out in the yards. So it sort of works the same, but 300 years older.
Right. Yeah. And with that, how did you get your training to do that? And how did you get interested in doing that?
I think I'm genetically programmed. I came from a line of farriers. In fact, the oldest recorded farrier in Newmarket in the 1720s was a Richard Curtis.
No way.
And, people didn't move about so much those days. And I haven't done the lineage thing, the genealogy.
Okay, yeah.
But that's some, coincidence. But I know that my great-grandfather was shoeing in the Newmarket area in the sort of 1850s, 1860s. So, when people were established in one place, it's not like today. They didn't move very far.
Right.
So that forge, the reason they know there was a farrier in Newmarket at that time, because in the records, there was an argument over the will, and it was the forge, who got the forge, which was behind the Wagon and Horses pub in the High Street. So I know where it was. It's not there anymore. There's another building, offices, but we know exactly where it was.
Oh, incredible.
And we have moved all of about 100 yards, maybe 150. That's over, a couple of centuries. So it'd take us a long time just to get to the coast, probably about 10,000 years or something at that rate of moving.
No kidding. So from your great-grandfather, did both your grandfather and your father do it as well? Or did they take... Oh, okay.
Yeah, the business, and funny enough, I still trade under it, although I'm now really winding down, is O.A. Curtis and Sons. And the O.A. was Oliver Arthur, was my grandfather. So he was the one who had the name over the door. But he died when I was 2 years old, but I'm still trading under his name.
Right.
He had 5 sons and 3 daughters, and 4 of the sons became farriers, including my father. But my father really used to run the business because he was a little bit older than his other brothers.
Okay.
And then he had 4 sons, my father. 3 of us shod horses.
Okay.
My older brother, by a year, is retired because of ill health. My younger brother, who's only 2 years younger than me, he's still going strong.
Wow.
And the 4th brother looks after the gardens at Nottingham University, so he does something totally different.
Okay, yeah. There always has to be one that veers off and tries something else.
Yeah, some might say smart enough to get out, or I don't know. No, we had a pretty good time. There was a time at the forge in the 70s when there was 4 Curtises of my father's generation and 3 of mine, so there was 7 in the forge.
Wow.
Plus there was another 16 guys.
Holy jeez.
23 in the forge for quite a few years.
Yeah.
And 13 fires in the forge. I mean, by the time I ran it over the last 15 years, we were down to just 4 coke fires, but we always had a couple of gas fires. But you could see in the ceiling where it had been repaired, you could still count
where the chimneys had been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There were days when all of them were going, and that's pretty hot and sulfurous.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've breathed some pretty toxic air for a while.
Yeah.
So would the whole business be run from there, or as time progressed, did you actually have to have mobile units?
Well, we were 95% platers, so you don't need mobile units.
Right.
And in fact, everything was so close. I still say Newmarket's the only place on earth where Farrier can earn a living on a bicycle. Yeah. And there's at least 2 that I know that do that.
Really?
Yeah, because they, all the yards were within 1 mile.
Yeah.
Stud farms are spread out further, but so it's far tighter than, for example, Lexington. This is a little town of 13,000 people, and all the yards are in the town.
Right.
And then the stud farms, whichever direction you drive in from, you see stud farms.
Okay.
So there's, I don't know, about 90 or 100 stud farms as well.
Wow. A lot of history there. Now, in North America, in the racehorse industry, definitely there's been a downturn, mostly for the harness horses, but some would say for the thoroughbreds as well. Is that something that you have seen there?
Yeah, they were telling me that in Lexington, how much it's dropped, and 30% fewer foals. And
yeah.
No, it's really strong in the UK. Nobody quite knows why, because the prize money is really poor on the average racers, okay, at the very top.
Okay.
But there's a high prestige and high quality of horses, and the crowds have remained. It's the second biggest spectator sport in the UK behind soccer.
Wow.
So it's bigger than rugby or cricket.
Or your sophisticated baseball. Isn't that what you called it?
I did, yes.
Yeah, I remembered that from your talk.
Yeah, I don't know how I got away with that one. I'm
In front of a whole crowd of
talking to
North
1,000
Americans.
Americans. And,
Yeah, you're a brave, brave man.
well, you say it with a smile on your face and people don't mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
What led to you doing all of these other things that you have done for the industry? Like the reason that you are a household name are the textbooks that you wrote, and then just all of this extra education that you went and got yourself and then shared.
Well, I did spend the first 10 years of my career as an out-and-out plater, although it was a slightly different Newmarket. Platers also did the stud farm work, so we'd be morning platers, afternoon stud farm work. But even that, after 10 years, I was starting to vegetate, and I thought there's got to be more to this.
Mm-hmm.
And we had the Farrier's Registration Act come in 78, but it didn't come into effect until 1980. In other words, the law wasn't in effect. And I was sort of grandfathered in, as was everybody who could show that they'd shod horses for 2 years.
Okay.
Only about a quarter of the farriers in the UK had a qualification, and they were put in part 1 of the register. And then those of us that could show we'd had some sort of training or apprenticeship and done it for 2 years were in part 2. And I don't like being in part 2 of anything. So it's sort of, I asked, and it was really insular and sort of like it was here, really, that racetrack farriers, so in effect that's what we were. I didn't meet another farrier from outside Newmarket for the first 10 years of my career.
Wow.
And so I found out that I could get some training to learn this hot shoeing thing. I also found out later that, of course, my father had done a lot of hot shoeing and hunters, but he sort of forgot to tell us that because he just wanted us to be platers.
Okay.
And I got some training, and I went and took my diploma of the Worship Company of Farriers, and that was okay. I mean, I've been shoeing 10 years, and we handmade our shoes, really. That was about the point when we started to buy in shoes.
No way.
Yeah, so we used to have to hand make all shoes. So I was, pretty good shoemaker and very efficient.
Right.
People really don't believe it, and my apprentices refused to believe it, that I could make 12 shoes clipped and ready to go on in an hour.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know what all this messing about is. To make a dozen shoes in an hour, you have to be quite efficient. And I used to make toe bend, so put the toe bend in and finish the outside branch. So then make the heel, turn it, stamp, pritchel it, and then I'd put the inside branch in and go through that process. So 2 heats the shoe was made.
Wow.
And I'd be working on a dozen bars at a time, and that would take me 45 minutes, and then I would put them back in the fire to do the clips.
Okay, that was my question. Yeah.
And then I would cold rasp the heels. So, if you do a good job, it was just cleaning the burrs off and not.
Right, few knocks.
You end up like a machine, and even without thinking it, all your nail holes are in the same spot. When I started, my shape would wander and my nail holes would wander, but they would all come out the same. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you made a mistake, you repeated it through all 12.
Right, yeah.
And it was funny, you go into this mode. So I used to make 2 dozen each night for overtime from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and then 3 dozen on a Saturday morning, because the guy my father sent me with, he said to me, you don't have to come in on a Saturday, Simon. Well, my father wasn't going to have that. All the other guys coming into work.
Okay.
And so he said, no, you got to go into work, but you can make shoes if you like. And so just so that the other guys were seeing me working. And we used to get paid £1 for a dozen finished. And I thought I was a millionaire because I was only getting paid £9 a week. So that's probably about $12 US, £9. And then I was getting £13, which was about $18 US overtime.
Right.
And I really thought I was coining it in. I'd got all this money in my pocket to spend. And But as I say, it sort of gets you really into a routine. And so when I stepped up to making shoes for ponies and hunters, I always think it's easier to scale up. Farriers that start on draft horses find it harder to scale down.
Right.
But I think guys going up from a precision point of view, that's been my experience anyway, that's easier that way. So after 10 years of doing this, and this registration act had come in, and I was in part 2, so that made me uncomfortable. So I took the exam, and I just had 3 days training with the guy. So when I went and hot shod the horse in my diploma, it was the 3rd horse I'd ever hot shod in my life.
Wow.
And that's why when I trained apprentices, basically in a plating situation, but we did have a few that we hot shod, and they all used to worry about their exam. But for us, for years when I trained apprentices, hot shoeing was special. We never got into this habit of numbers. We'd have a horse and we'd make the shoes for it and hot shoe it. But they all worried about their diploma. And as I say, apprentices never believe you. They believe everybody else, their classmates, their mate that doesn't even know what a horse is. Yeah, so I went and passed this exam, but I also sort of got the bug. Most people get very stressed at exams. That's the majority of the population.
Yep. And
I sort of didn't. I'm like, which is always the only thing that's worried me in life is that I don't get worried about things like that. It was like, and I actually enjoyed it. For me, an exam is like doing a quiz.
Yeah, okay.
Some people like doing pub quizzes or quizzes.
Yeah.
For me, that's all an exam is. It's just a quiz.
Just trivia night.
So I did that, and then I sort of looked into how you did the associate of the Worshipful Company of Farriers and the fellowship of the Worshipful Company of Farriers. So technically you could do that in 5 years. And I thought, I'm going to do it in 5 years. So you have to have an aim. It took me 7 years. But, if I hadn't had that aim for 5 years, it might have been
started.
10, 15. Yeah. So you got to have an aim, and you don't. I always have that in life as well, that I have an aim, a target, but I don't beat myself up if I don't get there, as long as I'm still moving in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So I did that. So I went back in 3 or 4 years and did my associate, which is different to what it is today. And I'm one of the people that changed it. I rewrote the syllabus because basically it was just a diploma rerun with forge welding and tool and fullering and knowing a little bit more about the theory. And that was never its intention. I went back and read. That exam came about in 1907 with the specific aim to encourage people in remedial shoeing. So in other words, shoeing to help conditions of the lower leg or the hoof. And so it was actually easy to rewrite the syllabus because I said, what do people need to do today still to fulfill that role?
Right.
So it's an important difference. The diploma is to try and produce farriers who are basic, good quality farriers, to do various types of horses but with basic shoes. And then the next exam is to produce farriers with these more specialist skills and knowledge. And we keep, every now and again, we blur the lines between the two because there's obviously an overlap.
Yeah.
But I just sort of get on my fellow examiner's case and say, no, these are two distinct exams. Come on, let's keep them distinct. Mm-hmm. And then so I got that, I passed that exam. I can remember you had to go to Hereford College then, which at that time was our only farrier school.
Oh, wow.
We have 3 now.
Yeah.
And there was a power failure with 15 minutes to go.
Oh, my gosh.
But I've shod the horse. You only shod 1 foot, and it was a bit more like a competition as well, and you made a specimen. So I was just finishing the last shoe, and they sort of said, they came around and said, okay, we can freeze the exam now, because there was, I think, 4 candidates on at that. And I can't even remember what the others did, but I said, no, I'm going to get finished. So I was trying to just finish this shoe, which was cherry red, because there was... And, of course, the moment we finished, the power came back on. But it was funny. I remember we all passed, and I was in very, very good company. I don't know whether they remember it, but I had Carl Betterson one side of me, who went on to be in the England team and manage the England team. And of course, Jimmy Blurton, who was Welsh competitor, and of course, makes every bar shoe known to man now, and he was the other side. And I thought, an exam is not a competition.
Yes.
Everybody can pass or everybody can fail. Whereas in a competition, you're graded, from best to worst or whatever. But nevertheless, it doesn't matter who you are. Examiners, however much they try not to be biased, of course, if you see 2 really good jobs and 1 average one, you're thinking that's not very good. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, it went well, and that was that. And we all passed. And the funny thing is, the afternoon 4 guys, they all failed, which I don't know whether... I'm hoping that was just a pure coincidence. And so I got that under my belt. And even by the time I did that, the fellowship was a sort of target. And
right.
So 2 years later, or 2.5 years later, I got it. And the fellowship's only changed slightly, really. And because, again, that came about in 1923. So we're soon going to, I hope, have a big party and celebration in 3 years' time.
No kidding.
So the whole idea was that, so we'd had this basic exam, which is now called the diploma. We had the associate to produce farriers who are able to use farrier skills to help horses with, as I say, various conditions of the limb and foot. So then we needed farriers to pass on this information. So again, when people get confused about what the fellowship is, it's really a communication examination, which is why farriers have to write a thesis, and they also have to give, 2 lectures now. They give 1 lecture on their thesis, so they've had as long as they like to prepare.
Right.
And the other one is a tough test. You're given 1 hour's notice of a subject, and you have to give a 20-minute lecture.
I've heard of this.
Now, the reason for that is, the thinking behind that, and I agree with it, is that you can't learn that subject in 1 hour. But if you've got some books with you, you can check up your facts, you can organize slides, and with PowerPoint, you can have certain things ready that are common to lots of lectures. So you're allowed to use PowerPoint. If you want to just use a flip chart, and 20 minutes isn't so long,
No.
Well, your podcasts prove that, don't they?
Yeah. yeah.
And how it goes quickly.
It does.
So 20 minutes isn't so long. And I've had a lot of students now who successfully, I've helped them through the fellowship. And I say, by the time you've done your introduction, spelled out what you're going to talk about, and talk about it, and then you review it, it's the old, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them, then you're through the time. But of course, as examiners, we are sympathetic to the fact that 1 lecture of 20 minutes to support the thesis, they've had a lot of time to do. So that had better be good. But the 20-minute, the surprise lecture, we know it can't be as slick as that. But
there's some leniency there.
But it is a test that's quite a tough test of ability. If you're able to communicate, if you're able to grasp the subject quite quickly, to say in an hour, you have got time to look a few things up because you've forgotten the anatomical name, or there's some, you're not quite sure. If you've got time to look it up, what you haven't got time is to learn it to the standard.
Right, yeah. You should already be
and
there.
So that's what we're looking for. So the fellowship is looking for farriers who can communicate, and they can study a subject with some precision and some depth. So they can write about it, and then they can talk about it. So really that's why some of our new fellows, and we've had quite a flush in the last 4 or 5 years, why you're seeing them at places like the International Hoof Care Summit, because they're already capable of standing up, whether it's one of the smaller classes where there's only 200 people in the room, or doing the round table and being able to hold a discussion, or standing up in the big hall in front of 1,000 farriers. And you see examples of that every year here now. So that's why we're producing some quite good speakers from actually quite a small pool of farriers. There's only 3,000 farriers in the UK.
Really?
Yeah. So of the 3,000 farriers in the UK, about, I think, 4, maybe 500 are associates. But of course, there's only worldwide about 40 odd fellows. It might have gone up to 50 now. Yeah, and to put it in perspective, my number on my certificate is number 177. And that also counts some people who have been given an honorary fellowship for their contribution to the craft. And that's since 1923. Well, obviously that only has averaged 2 a year. But as I say, for the last 5 years, there's probably been 15 new fellows. So it's sort of...
It's going up.
There's been a sudden flush of them coming through.
Yeah. Well, as someone attending the clinics, it's been interesting to see, especially coming from England, the people who give those talks, it is very much science-based. This is the study. These were the parameters of the study. This is how we set it up. These are the results. These are the things that it may or may not prove. All of that, compared to what before, we were kind of just relying on
opinion.
Yeah. And that person, they would believe pretty wholeheartedly in that opinion, but we're human and there are errors and confirmation bias and all kinds of things working against us. So it's very interesting. I love coming to things like this because there are so many concepts that people are studying and we don't hear about it until we sit in a room and get that full story. You also hear people who've gone to the conference, they took a couple bits out of it, relay it to you, and it becomes an anecdote again.
Well, that's the Chinese whispers thing, isn't it? It changes a little bit every time we're telling.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Farriers have become to understand science, and that doesn't mean we expect every Farrier on Earth to become a scientist. Vets are just as unscientific as Farriers are. Just because vets sound like they're scientific and have the right language, take it from me, they have all the bad habits that Farriers do. Once they have their favourite treatment, just about nothing will change
their
them.
mind.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but there are certain ones that
they will tell you that, as you know, I have lots of good veterinary friends, and I'm an honorary associate at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, so I have an honorary veterinary degree. But I rib them all the time because they keep saying to me, why aren't the Farriers evidence-based like us? And I say, yeah, and the stuff I've done where I've got the evidence, you still refuse to change your mind.
Right.
So don't give me that.
Yeah, we're all human.
But that is the way it's gone. And although we still allow case studies in the fellowship, even that I think will change, to this higher level of science. So case studies are good, but it's more difficult to measure them. So we really are looking for people to measure things and have it analysed. And I was talking to a guy here in the States who wants to do his fellowship only yesterday, and I think he's finally got it that he hasn't had his data analysed yet, and he's worried that it will not show what he thinks.
But that's good
I
too,
said
right?
to him, yeah, that's what I said. I said, you either prove your hypothesis and you write and say, as predicted, this is what happened, or you find it isn't, and you have to be able to write and say that, the surprising result was that this isn't what happens. Mm-hmm. And I mean, he's looking at something that we all think happens, so I'm not going to say any more than that, but we'll all learn something if he does a good study and he looks like good methodology, but it sort of counters, some very obvious Farrier dogma,
Right.
And that's what we need. We need to be confronted by it, and people sort of need to be relaxed about it and say, well, okay, so what does this mean to me? What does this mean to my job? How does it help me? How do I think about it? And not, in other words, not dig a trench and defend it, get hung up about it. Half the stuff I studied didn't come out as I thought. It was, so you just have to write it up and think about it and think, why didn't this come out?
Right. Yeah. I was talking to Mike Wildenstein yesterday, and he said, you've got to make mistakes because those help you learn just as much as, or more than actually just doing it right every time. And there is all of this stuff that does need to be proven or disproven. And every time that study is finished, regardless of the results, we're learning.
Yeah, the knowledge has been increased. And one of the things I say to Farriers, because you just used the word about proving, and of course, what they say to me is, what I want to prove is, and I say, don't ever use that word again.
Right. No, that's
because
thank
if you set out to prove something, you will prove it.
Yep, you've got bias.
So I always say to them, the first thing is say, I want to study this subject. And okay, you can get into the scientific of what a hypothesis is and testing the hypothesis. But the first thing is say, I'm going to study this. No, I'm going to prove something.
I'm going to be more aware of that now. And I think that's the same thing. I have seen veterinarians give talks, and they obviously had a particular thing they wanted to prove.
Yeah.
And so everything led there. And it has been shown that if we have a bias, even statistics can be altered or interpreted in a way that points in the direction they want it to, right?
And so it's hard doing, for example, your fellowship because you are doing it on your own, and that immediately leads to that bias. But of course, most other studies nowadays have 2, 3, 4 authors, and that protects them because they're having other people do different parts. I mean, for my PhD, almost all the measuring I did, apart from the radiographic measuring, and just so another person did that. So I can say that in the study. I didn't measure these radiographs. So they didn't even know what I was looking for. They just knew what angles I wanted measured and what distances. And actually there's a test, and statistics was never my strong point. There's even statistical tests that just test whether you are accuracy, really, of your measurements without even ever knowing what the measurements are, if you have enough data.
Okay.
I mean, statisticians are like all other professionals. The moment we catch up and the person in the street understands something, they find another weird statistical test and move on. And they have statistics conferences where I'm sure they're just delighted if they come home with a new statistics.
Right.
But for most Farrier studies, I mean, when Farrier said to me, I don't know anything about statistics, I said, so if I told you that 70% of my horses were chestnuts, you'd know what I mean. They go, yeah. I said, well, that's a pretty simple statistic, but that's all
There
it
you
is.
go. Yeah.
If I said on average, the hooves are sure 5 inches in width, you would understand that.
Yeah.
So actually the simple statistics we hear all the time.
Well, we quote them all the time because it's an easy talking point for a client or another vet we're talking to.
Well, it amused me one time when I did my Bachelor of Science, and I had on the foals I studied, and by the definition I had of a flexural deformity, I found that 10% of them, I think it was 11% actually, and so I gave this talk, and a guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, well, 20% of my foals get this. And I said, because by then I'd got into this scientific mode, so I said, oh, can I see the numbers? And he said, well, what numbers? It just come from his head.
Yeah.
And so
let me see the pudding.
Yeah. So so you do get that, and actually the numbers are not so important as once you've done the study is to interpret them, and that's where the discussion comes in. And of course, at conferences like this one, that's where the interesting thing should be. That why you carried out a study, how you did it, what your results were. But the most important thing is the discussion afterwards. What does this mean? And whatever people think, we all get this impression that these universities are spending this money on these esoteric studies which mean nothing to us in the real world. But I was under pressure, and I assume all students are. All they kept saying to me was quite regularly is, what could the impact of your studies be on your industry? And of course, how did the university interpret my industry? Well, it was the horse world and the farrier world, you see. So I used to forever have to justify. I mean, you do come up with imaginative ways of justifying things. It's for the welfare of the horse, and of course I'm working on these spoiled, overpriced thoroughbreds, and and you write it, and people get this idea in their head of some rescued donkey or something. So everybody plays that game a little bit. So, but you do have to justify why you're doing this and what impact it might have. So they were pretty pleased because I lectured and presented my PhD, which is only finished 3 years ago. And I reckon in the first 18 months I was thinking 2,500 plus farriers,
Wow.
Now, of course, there was 1,000 in the room here. That gives you a good start one time.
Yeah.
But, I did some other conferences that were quite big, and then lots of talks, whether it's 50 or 100 guys. They even monitor that because the professors, they get rated on how many papers come out, but also the impact of their students' work.
Okay.
So they're quite keen for you. So when I sort of was, for the first couple of years, recording how many people I was speaking to, they were really pleased. And they did a thing which a lot of people would have helped me with, where they did a survey, an online survey about who had heard of my work and what it had meant and where they'd heard it. And now, you're talking about bias. Of course, I put it out on my Facebook page, and that got them lots signing up and other things like that. Well, that's an immediate bias because these are people that I would hope already like me to a certain extent.
Of course.
So they're going to say, yeah, this was great and we learned a lot. So I understood that. But I'd have to say the university still was, because they hadn't had so many respondents. And the other thing, of course, is I started my PhD in my mid-50s, and I used to say I was the oldest student in the UK, but as they told me a number of times, I wasn't even the oldest student in that university. But I had two gorgeous, clever girls who were doing similar equine ones with me, one on surfaces, which of course is very interesting now about these arena surfaces,
Right.
And one on the muscle twitch for show jumpers. But I used to tell them that we were like brother and sisters, we were just kids going through university.
You were just the older
and
brother.
they were like 27, 28. But anyway, at least they never called me dad or anything like that.
Oh, that's
But,
good, yeah.
I mean, it's been a growing thing over the years anyway in the Western world for people to take the opportunity to do degrees later in life. It's sort of hard work, but on the other hand, you're more motivated. And, I never missed a deadline or a...
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't like I am as a farrier, there was no, I can't get there today. And my supervisor said that at the end of the thing. They said, because I always got myself to the meeting before they got there. And
You're in a different headspace at that stage in your life, aren't you?
Yeah, and it was important to me. Yeah, so it was good. I sometimes now look back and wonder how on earth I did it. It's a little bit like when they say, that if you bang your head against the wall when you stop, it really feels good.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I just sometimes look back and think, how did I do that? And I was full-time in business then. I'd sort of said to the university, because it was a part-time PhD, that I was part-time farrier and part-time PhD, but that was not true. I was full-time farrier and part-time PhD.
Okay.
But the thing about academics is, see, we were advised we needed to do 17 hours a week as a part-time student. And one of my kids said, Dad, I didn't do that full-time at university. I'm like, don't tell me that. But the other thing I realized is, of course, I genuinely did it every week of the year. And I suddenly realized, well, the academic year is only 30 weeks. Mm-hmm. I mean, Cambridge and Oxford is only 24 weeks. But if we say 30 weeks at 17 hours, I can't actually do the math. But anyway, whatever it is, about 500 hours or something. Well, that brings it down to 10 a week. But I was doing a lot more than 10 a week. I used to call Monday my academic day. And when I had meetings, I'd drive up on the Sunday afternoon because it was on a good day, 4.5 hour drive, and on a bad one, 6 hours to my university. Then I would have my meeting with them and then drive back in the afternoon, evening and get home. But when I didn't have those meetings, so I had the day on my PhD work, whatever that entailed. So if you can do 10 hours in a day and then a couple of evenings of 2 hours or 3 hours, actually you get there quite easy. Mm-hmm. And I was often doing 30 hours a week on my PhD. So I really got ahead and stayed ahead. And when you do a PhD part-time in the UK, it's 6 years.
Okay.
So if you're full-time at university, it's 3 years. But if you're part-time, it's 6 years. And I didn't realize I got so far ahead at one point that one of my supervisors said, the university won't let you do it in 4 years. But I sort of knew even then. I said to them, look, I'm not going to do it in 4 years, but I did it in 5 years, 1 month. And they
did you? And they let you do it?
Yeah, because it's what you accomplish in the time. they have time limits now because they don't want people taking 10 years. Mm-hmm. In fact, I think they said I needed to do it in 6 years. If in exceptional circumstances like illness or what have you, you do it in 7 years. But a very good friend of mine, the university said to him at 9 years, you either get this done and get it in 3 months or you're finished. Mm-hmm. At which point, of course, he got it done. And
Yeah.
I was never like that at school either. I was never the guy that, I never got my homework in. And
Really?
so it just shows you change when you get older, when you're doing something you want.
Something you're passionate about.
Yeah, I loved it. It was a great time. But, it's that was over a few years ago, and then you move on. And I've been trying to, as I say, make use of that information, not just directly what I learned in the studies, but also thinking more wider, which is why, the presentation I did about hoof shape, part of that is just thinking more widely about what causes these hooves to change shape. And sometimes they're changing shape for healthy reasons. We can forget that there is actual natural and healthy changes. And of course, as we well know, there's often distortion of the hoof is associated with various pathologies. So you might say unhealthy changes of hoof shape. And that's where I say that once we figure out exactly what causes the hoof to change, then as farriers, we can start having more focused strategies. One of the things I could show, and I think I was the first person to show this, that compression occurs in the hoof, and that's one of the things that, for example, if it's compressing one side more than the other, clearly we're going to get a distorted hoof. If it's compressing at the dorsum and not at the heel, we get a club foot. And so once you realize it's to do with compressing and loading, then as a farrier you think, well, how do I shift the loading? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of things we've done almost intuitively, like whether it's the use of a heart bar or digital support, orthotics as some people call it, lateral extensions, all those really are about, we haven't changed the weight of the horse, we haven't changed the weight coming through the leg, but loading is the distribution of the weight. So we can do that as farriers. Mm-hmm. And people learn to do it almost intuitively, or what we need to do to get better is actually have that scientific background so we can really think, now, if I move this loading from one part of the foot to the other, I'm reducing the compression where it's actually distorting this hoof and spreading it better among the hoof. Mm-hmm. So you see what I mean? We should be able to get more focused treatments instead of people saying, yeah, this shoe works great for me. Well, Why does it work great for you? And especially the thing that drives me crazy when people will say, well, one shoe works for one person, it doesn't work for another. Well, is that how we drive cars? One car works for somebody, when somebody else gets in, it doesn't work for them.
Yeah, right.
I mean, if it works for somebody, it should work for everybody.
Yeah, and there should be a reason that it isn't.
Yeah, if we can pass on the information of, so what's going wrong? Is it the foot trim that's going wrong, or the placement of the shoe, the positioning of the shoe? Because a shoe is a shoe, and it can't work in one, for one person and not another.
That's almost like intellectual laziness to just be able to say, oh, well, that just isn't going to work, or it didn't work for me, so I tried it, and that's it. But to go deeper and try to understand it. I will admit that sometimes you see those studies published, and it's hard to get yourself to sit down and read what the numbers are and what the results were. But I think it's because a lot of us just haven't been trained to interpret it.
I'll tell you how to do it. All right?
Okay.
There is a reason why they all have an abstract, which is often only 300 words.
Yep.
You read the abstract, and then you say, is this of interest to me or not? And if it's not, or it's not doing it for you, put the paper to one side. So that doesn't take you a lot of time, right?
Yeah.
Now, if it is of interest to you, read the introduction and then skip to the discussion, because you might not actually care that much about how the study was carried out. You want to know why they did it, and you want to hear what happened. Mm-hmm. And then if it's a paper that you really want to read and you've really got into it, of course, read the methodology, read that critically, read the results, don't worry if you're not a statistician. You've got to just come to terms with if they're saying something is shown and is significant, then that's important, and then read through the discussion again and the conclusions. But so there's ways of reading it. I used to have 600 to 800 papers. Well, there's only so much reading you can do. So I learned that. That's why they always have an abstract.
Okay.
That saves us all, reading 3,000 word paper and thinking, that didn't teach me much. I didn't get much from that. And then the next one you pick up, you do the same thing. Well, you soon get tired of it. So
right.
So there's ways of filtering them. And so along with everybody, although I think, I can't remember how many references I had in my PhD. It may well have been up to 100. But you sort of have about 8 or 10 core papers that are really important to you. And those ones you read over and compare with what you've done. And so, again, you have to have this system of filtering stuff.
Now, I'm sure this can happen, and it's something that maybe somebody like myself who isn't as good at interpreting those things, somebody can present something that they wanted to prove, in quotation marks, and give it the appearance of a study, right?
Yeah.
There are certain indicators that should stick out for us. Are there things that you could?
There was a study of papers which showed that 70% of papers had been massaged in some way.
Yeah, that's that human nature thing again.
So we have to be aware of that. The reason you have peer-reviewed stuff in journals is to try and stop that. The other thing that's happened in recent years and with my university is all my data they had electronically. So if they ever wanted to run a test, they would say, hey, this didn't give the result you said it gave.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
And papers nowadays do that. And in fact, they often publish them because stuff's published electronically, where somebody else, just a reader can use
recreate the test.
Yeah.
And okay.
So there are ways that they're trying to do that. In some ways, it's hard in the horse world because, of course, there's numbers that help. Most horse studies, people can't do 1,000 horses. Mm-hmm. You see a lot of stuff that's influenced us is on 6 horses or something.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing in any paper. It should tell you how many horses. Once you get up to about 15, it depends what you're studying really and how big the differences are. You can often get significant results. But 30 is the magic number in statistics often. And in other words, if you want to find out what was the average height of men in Canada, well, if you measured 3, that's not going to be very accurate.
Yeah.
But actually, once you get up to 30, you're going to be pretty accurate. But of course, it depends where you measure them. If you're down in the bar, what you're really saying, that where you measure them, is this is the average height of Canadians who go in a bar.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
So that's the thing. So papers also should be very clear about where they've got the data. And that's why I'm forever saying my studies were on thoroughbred foals. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was easier thoroughbred foals because you know the exact day they're born. And that they are thoroughbreds. So you've got this homogenous group. I was studying them all on a stud farm. But what I shouldn't do is extrapolate too much that the same thing would be true of, should we say, shires or quarter horses.
Right.
But I actually have a feeling for most hoof things, they don't vary that much. There would be variance, whether it's hoof growth rate, it would vary from country to country and breed to breed.
Yeah.
But not much, and you learn so much just on one. And of course, because of the economics, that I think 70% of science on the horse's hoof is the thoroughbred. Probably the next 20-odd% is split between quarter horses and warm bloods. And then there's just 1 or 2 odd breeds because, they attract money in to do these studies. And you have large groups of horses in one place, which helps.
Yeah.
So often farriers doing studies don't have that luxury, but they just have to get by and say this was just, so should we say they're measuring the size of the distal phalanx and they're coming out of an abattoir bin? Well, you're getting what you're given, but you have to be clear. In other words, that would affect, your collection. Mm-hmm. They're less likely to be young horses, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
because they're dead in the bin. Now, they've, you know, the longer anything lives, there's more reasons for it to die. Mm-hmm. And there comes a point where they're certain to die. So you're going to have a bias if you do that sort of collection.
Right.
My bias was not that, but it had its own. It was, you know, it was what I said it was. So that's, again, the thing with science. You try and cut down these variables, but it's very difficult in our game. And sometimes you have to use what you can get your hands on and, you know, and do it like that. And let's face it, that there's lots of horses out there that guys shoe that the owner doesn't even know the age.
Right.
You know.
Yep.
You say, is your horse old? And they'll say, oh, I think it's a little bit older than that. It's like, yeah, that's accurate. But again, you shouldn't get hung up about it. You've got what you've got and you make the best of it. And as long as you're honest about the material that you've got and your collection. And yeah, so anyway, that's the way there is a protection for us by papers is peer reviews and the fact that people can go over your data again. Right. That doesn't guarantee that people don't massage it. Maybe I have a, should we say, a soft view of human nature, in that I think it would be highly unlikely for people, should we say, to outrageously cheat and set about doing, you know, and just creating data that isn't true. But yeah, of course, they pick tests, you know, as I say, statistical tests are quite widespread. You know, don't you think, oh, I did it, everybody does it. You pick the test that will show your work to the best light. So that's not manipulating the figures, but somebody, a peer review, they might say, why didn't you do this statistical test? We need you to do that, you see. And you got to do it.
Yeah, add that to your dissertation.
All those things. As I say, statistics were never my strong part. I had to do a 2-week course. But I'm 3 years out of it now, and it's all drifting away. Because I'm not, you know, you only really remember over a long term what you use. And although I helped Farriers for a few years with the statistics, so that was helping me keeping going, I had one of those packages which costs you a fortune. And then when you change your laptop, you can't transfer it. You know, it's a one-off download. So they know how to make money out of it. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of thought, I think it would be about $800 or $1,000 to replace it. And I think, no, I don't actually need that for my life anymore. And so again, the guy I was talking to here at the conference, helping them, you know, I said, you've got to go off and find a local statistician. You have to sit next to them because to a certain extent it's numbers, but they have to have some idea of what you're testing for. Right. You know, the simplest testing is, for example, you know, you want to know if you want to compare the thoroughbred with a quarter horse, and you've got a lot of thoroughbreds and a lot of quarter horses. So you do the same measurements, and you test if your data is good by, you know, seeing if it's normally distributed, and then you compare the one group to the other, and that's a paired t-test. And you don't have to have 30 of one and 30 of the other. It will test quite correctly 30 against 20.
Okay, right.
So that's what it does. And it'll tell you whether these two groups differ or whether they do not differ. If you notice, I didn't say they're the same, but that's what statistics does. It will say, and you'll just ask it, is there a difference? And statistically, there'll either be a difference or there won't be a difference. And so if you're clear about that, then there's, you know, should we say you want to test the left four against the right four. So a lot of testing is comparison. A lot of it is obviously, you know, the other one is a timeline over a period of months. So if you can measure hoof growth, does it go up or down? And so there's always statistics to look at all those things. Mm-hmm. I learned early on not to get hung up, you know, whether I'd got good data or what have you. The test a statistical test will tell you, so you can relax. They'll either say this data's no good, in which case, sadly, you have to throw it away.
Start back to the drawing board.
Or it will say it's good data and you can use it, you know. Yeah. That's it.
And is that something that you can also, you take your findings and take it to a statistician?
Yeah, you can do, you know, there's universities everywhere. And actually, if you ask around, I think many farriers would shoe for a statistician or somebody that's good enough to do it. Right. And yeah, you need a tame statistician.
I
mean, both my supervisors were really good at it. But one of them, he actually taught statistics. So,
Okay.
but they wouldn't do my statistics for me. I mean, I had a hard time with them. And I had to do them, and I was really shocked towards the end of my studies when Sarah Hobbs, who was my director of studies, there was something that she needed me to retest, and then she said, "Oh, if you give me your data, I'll do it." And I looked at her because for 4 years she'd made me do everything.
That was not an offer.
And she actually said, "That's because you now know how to do it, but it's still going to take you 4 hours, and it'll take me 15 minutes." I said, "Fine, that sounds
Not going to argue with that.
Yeah.
No.
So, I mean, that's not a rule necessarily, but that's the way they worked with me to make me learn the statistics. I actually had to do them, but it was slow work. As I say, they would be quite slow shoeing a horse as well.
Right.
So.
Yeah, for sure. So you're always somebody who has something on the go, it seems. What's your next? I mean, there's the podcast, and that must take some time.
It doesn't take a lot of
Well,
time.
yeah,
I'm not as professional as you, Brian. I'm looking at your equipment here. I have a joke with the people I do a podcast with. I tell them I've got my pop-up studio, and actually it's one microphone plugged into my iPad. And it doesn't take a lot of time. If it's somebody I know, I take 5 minutes. I know you don't have any questions. There's nothing, but I have to write down about a dozen questions.
I did, and this is the first week I've tried because it feels more like a conversation.
You're freestyling.
Yeah, and most of my guests, I found they take the conversation where it needs to go anyway. So
I sort of have my 12 questions. Doesn't mean I use them, and it is the same thing that sometimes one of them triggers a conversation and we go.
Yeah.
But I just try and do 30 minutes. Once I've hit 25 minutes, I look at the timer and I think,
winding it down.
well, I've had one or two, as I'm sure you have, and I think I'm one of those people. It's difficult to shut them up.
No, I love long form.
So I don't mind. In fact, I had an Aussie Farrier when I was out there last year, and he listens to the podcast, and he said to me, "You got to make them longer, Simon." Well, of course, he drives 6 hours.
Yeah.
To his first horse or something,
He'd go through them pretty quickly, and then what is he going to do?
That's what he said. He said, I got through 4 driving down here for this conference. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing that, the podcast thing has taken off. Mm-hmm. And it's funny how long it's taking, because I know we were discussing the other day that it's 15 years since podcasts came about. It's only been the last 2 years that it's sort of become, people don't tend to say, what's a podcast?
You're right, yeah.
But as I always tell people, the first podcast I listened to was the one I'd done.
Really?
Yeah, but the one I was being interviewed with Jeremy McGovern.
Right, okay, yeah.
But I didn't know what a podcast was, so when he contacted me and said, would you do a podcast? I didn't go, a what?
What do you want me to do?
And so I think it really suits Farrier's podcast, because you jump in your truck or your van, whether you've got 30 minutes or an hour to drive, put it on. You can listen to a sequence of them. You can think, I'm only going to listen to one now. I'll have the radio on. Yeah, they are designed for farriers, I think. It'll be just a growing thing. I mean, I have been asked whether I'd do technical ones, an anatomy one or something like that. But my goodness, I think that would be hard. And that would be hard work. And I'm not really looking for that. I just think, no, I'll leave that to somebody else to do those. I'll probably enjoy listening to them by myself. But yeah, so if it's somebody I really don't know, then I spend about half an hour in research and get my questions ready and then do it. But no, for me, it's quite an easy art form, shall we say, communication form. Yeah, I got into that, I don't know, just over a year ago, I think about 15 months. And, I take the opportunity. I've only recorded one myself this week because I've got about a backlog of 6 or 8, and I just want to chill out and not do even that. I get lots of opportunities, and so I like to do them, the podcast. I have got into YouTube a bit, but I haven't had a fallout with my videographer, but he's just not become as easy to do the videos. And I know we've got about 10 that haven't been edited. I need to somehow get around to doing those.
Well, here's your call out to him right now. Hopefully he hears this, and then you hear back pretty soon.
So we've got to get those done. But, of course, videoing and YouTube is a lot harder.
Yeah, there's a lot more to it.
And although, again, people are not expecting the same production values as, Hollywood or
Right.
BBC TV. You need to do it at a certain level, and it needs more planning and more editing. And I decided anyway that I was going to give it 1 year. And actually that year will be up in June, so I've got a bit of time to go. But yeah, that was the plan. Try it for a year.
See what happens.
Yeah, and just have fun. And my videos are fun, but just like the podcast, you can't quite predict who are the popular ones and who aren't. I'm quite surprised at some of them. Anybody listening to this needs to go onto my podcast and click on Chris Pollock, because it's brilliant. One of the absolute geniuses of, the veterinary stroke farriery world. And he's one of my lowest listened to.
Wow.
I can't explain it. How can I explain that?
Well, now it'll change, hopefully.
Well, that's why I did it.
Yeah, let's see what happens.
But and then other ones, and I can't explain why they're getting so many listens, but who knows? So that's the podcast. The videos are sort of slightly worked out, I think, what makes them popular. My ones, they want to see me under a horse, which is fine, but I'm just got to that stage in my career where I'm trying to avoid getting under horses. But in other words, again, people don't like the anatomy ones. And I've spoken to a couple of other YouTubers, and they say that's fairly consistent. Farriers will say to you, why don't you do something on anatomy? And they're probably one of the 3 people that
will watch it.
So it's quite low. And other things really take off. So you can't quite predict it. I know I never do it, but my daughter looks at the analytics. And so, you get this age profile and time profile and even country. And you sort of get some idea. But even some of those, you think, why? I don't know why I'm getting those ones and not getting the audience that I thought. So it's quite interesting. And as I say, I just make it fun because, it is possible to make money YouTube, but you have to have high numbers of people.
Yeah, I
watching.
think that has gone up too. I could be wrong. But what is your drive to do this? You have spent so much extra time helping us out. Like, you're educating us.
Yeah, well, I suppose the simple thing is enjoyment. It gets me out of the household chores.
Yeah.
But, my wife always says, she says to me, you just do what you want to do, don't you? I said, yeah, and what's wrong with that? Isn't that where we all want to get? Mm-hmm. And so you can see I'm still intrigued by the profession. I enjoy it. There's so many really good, interesting people, characters. Yeah, so in a way, that's what drives me. But I do, again, occasionally think to myself, why are you so driven? I always, so I sort of have a target and I go for it. But I do have relatively short-term targets in as much as the 6 years for the PhD. That was quite a long one. Mm-hmm. But always when I was a younger farrier, I had a 5-year plan. I was never drifting through life.
Right.
And I would say that if you have a plan, you don't always go down that road you think. But if you don't have a plan, then you're totally lost. In other words, you have a direction ahead. So I used to have targets. I now say I have 2-year targets now. But so I like to have projects, and I've got a couple of other projects on the go. Well, I've got currently 2 books. One should be out this August, I hope.
I can't wait.
And then the next one, although originally it was scheduled for this year, it's sort of had a little bit of slippage.
Oh, okay.
But that might be because I'm with 2 co-authors on that one.
Yeah.
I'm already getting my excuses in. So I'm...
calling them out.
Like when I did Who for the Horse, when I wrote that, I gave myself 2 years to write it, and I did it in 22 months. So,
wow.
So I was really quite focused on it. And when I said I had an academic day Monday, so when I finished my PhD, that became my writing day.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually now that I've really cut down, I have a Friday as well. And so I've got more space for these things to happen. So I've still got plenty of projects. Now I've sort of got ideas for a couple other books, but they're so far on the back burner that they're nearly tipping off the oven hob, There's not 100 books for me to write, but I think there's 10. And I'm careful that the books are different. They're not, like if you buy an album of music, or when people used to, and it was annoying because there was actually only 2 songs you didn't have. Well, I know that people would be annoyed if I just keep regurgitating.
Right.
So I'm quite careful on that. And for example, the Hoof of the Horse bears no relation to anything else that I've done. And that was a bit of a nerdish project because I thought, Farrier's really going to have a book that doesn't have shoeing methodology or trimming methodology in it. Now, there's a chapter on shoeing, but it is what effect does shoeing have on the hoof. There's a chapter on trimming, but it's what effect does trimming have on the hoof, not this is my ideas of how. So it was a different way of thinking. And I did agonize for a while about whether this worked, and it sold twice as fast as any other book I've done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there are lots of guys that, because there's a dearth of books. I mean, there's not a new Farrier book come out each year, is there?
No.
Probably I don't know, in the last 25 years, it's probably averaged one every 3 years or something. And again, I don't see myself in competition to whether it's Hickman or Butler or Gregory, because I think the Farriers that buy a book will probably buy them all because,
of course,
you buy them all and you don't fill a shelf.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think book buyers buy books. It's like the podcast.
Yeah, you said
Brian.
that the other day.
I think, I don't know, is there 4 podcasts on Farrier? We won't give publicity to the others, Brian. but the fact is, somebody that gets into podcasts and listening to them,
they're going to listen to all of us.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and they should, because there is going to be something that they'll get out of all of them.
Yeah.
It's just neat to be a part of it.
Yeah, so that's why I'm relaxed about that. And yeah, I do try, because my wife again says I'm a blabbermouth and tell people all my ideas. But the fact is, people don't go away and do it. She told me that about my first book, Foal Racehorse. So who else was going to write a book about farriery for foals? There was probably only 3 or 4 other guys in the world that are capable of doing it. And that wasn't their thing anyway, And so but the couple of ideas I've got coming up, I do need to, I need to, for other reasons, keep it secret. Otherwise, I would love to tell you.
Okay, well,
what
no,
my 2 books are.
We will eagerly anticipate them, because we all appreciate when those books come out, those of us who are the book buyers, you're right, we're going to buy them. It's exciting. I know how much work goes into that. Well, actually, I can't say I know. I can appreciate how much, and we do appreciate that. So thank you.
That's all right. That's what I do now. I mean, my life, as with all of us, has changed. I never envisaged that when I started off, plating racehorses.
Right.
It was the last thing in my mind. My father left school at 14, so you wouldn't say he was an educated man, but he used to have a saying. He used to say there will be a better way to shoe horses.
Yeah.
So he was talking about gluing on shoes in the 60s. And so he was awaiting the technology, and he never did really get to see it. I think the Mustad with the super glue putting them on, the Mustad Easy Glue shoes.
Right.
First ones that were usable. He sort of saw those. But I never thought that there would be anything to do with writing books and giving lectures.
Here we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's great. Would you be willing to answer a few short questions? We'll just
fire away.
Okay. Now, some of these, I guess, would be, you're still shoeing, right? Like, you've just tapered back. You haven't.
I'm 1 day a week, and that day often finishes at noon.
Oh, perfect. This portion of the podcast is called the Stratum Tectorium. These are the short answer, surface stuff questions, but it's okay if the guest wants to go deeper. Enjoy. Okay, so your favorite book?
Do you mean novel?
It can be novel, textbook.
My favorite, well, it is a textbook, but Sapiens.
Yes. Yeah.
You've read that?
Yes, I have. I've read that one. It's really good. The Novel Harari, right?
Yes.
Yes. It's really good.
Wonderful book. It explains just about everything in the world. From a novel point of view, I would recommend, and I recommended this to Mike Wildenstein, he's read it, and because he quoted Xenophon, and we had Xenophon this week. Xenophon was the first guy that wrote about hoof pattern axis.
Oh, okay.
So you might think, okay, so what a novel about him? He was a Greek general. All I can say is read the novel. It's The Falcon of Sparta, and it's about his exploits, how he brought 10,000 people home from the middle of Persia, or 10,000 soldiers anyway, 40s way back. It's quite extraordinary. And so we sort of know him, or nerds like me know him as the first person to talk about the Hoofpass actors, because he went on to write a book on horses. He also knew Socrates in his youth, and we wouldn't know about Socrates because he wrote about Socrates. So that's the other reason. But from a novel, if you like sword and sandals novels, Greeks carving their way back home, through the battlefield, then it's a wonderful read, and it's about somebody, and most of what is written in the novel is true.
Okay, I'm going to look that one up.
Yeah.
Your favorite brand of work boots?
Oh, I have, blowed if I can remember, and I've bought the same ones. Maybe the Caterpillar. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite make of rasp?
I moved over this late in my career to the wider, the XL.
That's a pretty common one.
Yeah. You imagine that I'd used the same width of rasp for 45 years, and then this wider, and I thought I'll give it a try, and I thought, this is fantastic.
Yeah, there's some people who will not change something like that. Do you have a dream Farrier rig? I guess this is kind of not
my van.
Yeah.
All right. And I have a van, not, because we're not going off-road.
Yeah.
I would say all I'm doing is transporting air, because I don't have any shelving in it because I have so little equipment. It's only occupying the bottom 6 inches. So there we are.
Okay. Favorite rounding hammer?
Well, I had one given to me, a Maori Farrier in New Zealand, handmade, Ryan Harris Hayes, and it's got a Manuka wood handle that I made. The best honey in the world is Manuka honey, isn't it?
Okay.
But the tree produces which the flowers of which produce the Manuka honey, produces a really good handlewood. And so he gave me this block. He didn't have a handle, and I had to smuggle it into Australia because they don't like you taking, should we say, animals or plant life from other countries. So, I did a little naughty thing, but I got it home, and I'm sure they weren't. I'm sure they're, people
They'll forgive that.
And it did make a beautiful handle. So I haven't got a brand unless I'm hoping Ryan starts producing. At the moment, he's developing his skills.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look forward to that. Favorite type of bar stock to work with? Favorite section?
Well, I can tell you that easy because I'm an old plater, and we used to shoe them in, I'd say 5/8, 5/16. I think here you'd say 5/16, 5/8.
Okay.
Which I think is about, in millimeters, 16 by 7. Yeah.
Okay.
See, I have to try and think in both, but
yeah.
So concave. If you can make concave of that size, you can make any bar stock.
Yeah. Cool. Favorite pastime after work?
I swim twice a week. I like to look after my garden. Writing is not a pastime. Okay.
Okay. Next thing on your bucket list?
Oh man, I thought I was doing well answering you straight off.
This one always catches people for some reason.
I've gone to so many places. I've never been to the Caribbean, so maybe that's it.
Oh, wow. Well, you should definitely check that out. Do you have a favorite brand of keg shoe?
Yeah, Kirkhart, because not that I got any credit, but I basically designed their racing, and especially the aluminum racing plates, although they then went and messed up the hind pattern. But they're my pattern, which has been copied by the other companies. If you look at them,
Yeah.
And when I first came here to the States, of course, the pattern for thoroughbreds was quite an oval pattern, and even the hind. And I used to watch the platers, even before they got to the horse, they straightened the toe quarter a little bit. And I'm thinking, well, they must know it's the wrong shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did this work for Kirkhart, and in the first year of it out, it was used on the Kentucky Derby winner, the English Derby winner, and the Melbourne Cup winner. And then when the other companies started to copy it, then the only thing Kirkhart didn't do is my nail pattern, but that's a technical thing. And I thought it was funny. I said to them, why haven't you done my nail pattern? They said, well, we'd like to have the same nail pattern as the other companies. I said, well, you don't like to have the same shape, the same clip, the same heels that I've chosen.
Yeah, why would you? Yeah.
So, but I got one trip to Australia out of it, but lots of Farriers do stuff. I'm just pleased that it's not only done well, it's had all these other companies copy its shape.
Which is a testament to how well it works. Leather or synthetic pads?
Synthetic.
Really? You're the first person to say that.
I'm a one-off.
Okay. Ideal number of horses to shoe all around in one day?
Look, I was never a numbers guy. I can tell you that for many years, I would do 7.5 sets day and 2.5 sets on a Saturday morning. That was 40 sets. And I used to think, if you can't earn a good living on that, then you're never going to earn a good living. So I was never a numbers guy.
Okay. I never have been either. Favorite anvil?
Well, the London pattern, for obvious reasons, and I know it comes in all shapes and forms, but yeah, the old Brooks London pattern, which is, I don't know whether they're even still made now, but that was, the original basic anvil.
Do you have a favorite inspirational quote?
I like Aristotle, and I'm not going to remember a quote now, am I? In all things in nature, there is something wondrous, is an Aristotle quote.
Okay. I'm a big fan too. Preferred social media platform?
Facebook.
What do you use as your planner or agenda?
I do try and do it. I run my calendar on my iPhone and iPad.
I'm just starting that this year. How's that going?
No, it works well. I might be doing something. I've got the settings wrong because after 2 months it deletes everything.
Oh dear.
So I try and remember to take a screenshot.
Right.
But then, do I want the tax man to know what I've been doing the previous months? So
Probably not.
the wife, or it's like. But it does do that, and it's probably some setting that I've got on it, and I don't mean to do it. But yeah, and I just use the notes for notes.
Yeah.
And then you can send you some. Yeah. So I've tried to. That's the other thing I've tried to do. I've tried not to be a technophobe in my life. It's something you have to fight at whatever age you are. You have to say, I'm going to do this.
Don't remain stuck.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite method of soothing aches and pains?
Well, I think from a back point of view, a hot bath, the old thing, is actually the best thing for Farrier's back. It also puts them in you put yourself in the right position where you're laying down on your back and you have your knees up. Unless it's one of these hotel baths where
a little short.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the best way to relax it.
Okay. Now this might be because you're from across the pond. Do you have a favorite brand of jeans to work in?
Well, I think my wife gets my jeans from Marks and Spencer, but I used to like Levi's. I used to be a Levi's guy, not a Wrangler.
Okay. Favorite drink?
Real ale. English ale.
Okay.
And, one of the changes here in North America of the 30 years I've been coming here is you couldn't get a decent beer in the whole country. And I only went to Canada a couple of times. I think it was the same there. Now there's all these craft breweries and they're making these IPAs and using more hops. And, so it's like home from home.
Easier to convince you to come out.
Yeah.
Do you work out?
I swim twice a week when I'm home, Monday and Friday. I sort of joined the gym last year when I cut down and I did that thing where after 2 months. So that's my intention to get back in the schedule. I had intended to do gym twice, swim twice. But I've been swimming twice a week for probably 20 odd years.
Wow. Okay. Do you have a favorite genre of music?
I think music stopped about 1985. So I love from mid-60s to about 1980. I'm not a country and western. Most British aren't. And that was one thing that struck me in Britain. It's sort of old people that listen to country and western. I came out here and did clinics and they'd say, hey, come on, we'll go off to the country and western. I'm looking at these people, I think, we're not old enough to do this. So it was more, rock. I wouldn't say I was a great heavy rock person, but rock and just pop. I love blues, but I can't stand a whole album. I don't know what it is. If I hear any blues song, I love it. But I couldn't listen to 45 minutes.
Yeah. Do you meditate?
No.
And what would you have been if not a farrier?
That's really opening. I sometimes forget I've got a microphone in my hand, so I nearly gave a really bad, politically incorrect answer there. I don't know, really.
I kind of want to hear the bad, politically incorrect answer.
Yeah, when the microphones are shut off, Brian.
You'll tell me.
Okay. I will, yeah.
Off the record.
Yeah, so I don't know. I probably wouldn't have been in the horse world because I only got into the horse world as a farrier.
Right.
What I do on the back of a horse can't be described as riding. It's sitting there. So I don't think I'd have been in the horse industry. I don't know. There's so many opportunities in the world. I don't know. I'd have found something.
I'm sure you would have, and taken it to the next level. Yeah. And is there anybody you think I should be approaching about doing this?
Podcast?
Yeah.
Well, it looks like you're doing pretty well. I think how many have you done at this conference?
You will be the fourth.
Yeah, so you've taken the opportunity. I mean, it's possibly harder for you that UK is a more compact place.
Exactly.
But of course, and I have visitors, and I'm trying to get a balance of different people in different spheres.
Yeah.
It doesn't just have to be top end people. Everybody's got a story, as you know.
That's right. Yeah.
They've all got a story, and I have people say to me about the podcast, "Oh, I haven't got anything interesting to say."
Yeah, I've had that too.
And I say that's my job to get it out of you. And they all have an interesting story. Every one of us. No, I think, and as I say, that I've been surprised some of the ones that are more popular than others. And farriers are not known in the rest of the world. I did Martin Darmanin, who's a farrier in Malta. And it's only because I go to Malta quite regular and sat him down and did it. And that's been one of the most popular.
Cool. Well, we all want to hear what it's like for somebody else.
Yeah.
Somewhere else, right?
So, I don't know, keep doing what you're doing. I'm going to have to up my game on the technology because this is, this actually feels like I'm getting a professional podcast recording. And actually, all the other ones I've done for people has been by Skype and plugged in.
Well, I've got some tips for you on that one too. And so I did an interview with Jonathan Nunn, and I sent him a microphone. So if there's anybody over there that you think I should talk to, we can talk about this afterwards, but he's willing to send the microphone to them. So
good system.
Yeah, so we'll see how far that could travel through Europe.
I can give you off the top of my head when we finish the list of 10 people.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I apologize that I was late getting to you to do it. Roy and I got a little caught up in our conversation, but this has been great.
That's been my pleasure.
Really appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, as you just heard, Dr. Simon Curtis has done a lot to support our industry and to promote education of farriers. There are many ways we can support him in return. Please purchase one or all of his textbooks. Their pages are full of an abundance of knowledge that we all should know. Have a listen to his wonderful podcast. He's had some great guests, and they're only 30-minute segments, so they're easy to digest. You can listen to one in between stops. And please subscribe to his YouTube channel. It's listed under Dr. Simon Curtis, and as he mentioned in the interview, he has a segment called My New Market. There's some pretty good videos in there. He's put a lot of time and effort into them. And just as everything else that he's approached, he's just a natural at being on camera as well. Thank you for listening. Please take care of yourselves and each other out there.